Thank you, Debbie. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the nervous laughter at the prospect of pensions legislation. We've already had some really useful intros from the two Johns about pensions, hearing what a prominent part of your spend it is, and the tidal wave of legislative change that we're seeing. I'd like to start by trying to wake you up a little bit to it, so I'm going to ask you a question. If you could reach into the right-hand side of your chair and take out the 1990s looking BlackBerry that's a voting device. Could we have the question up, please? Thank you. Could you let me know, on the freedom and choice agenda in pensions, which of the three best describes your view? If it's more than one, pick the one that you feel most strongly about. It's just to give us a sense of where we are in the room and where to focus the talk. I'll pick myself, but I don't want you to see. That was exciting. Right. Can we have the results up, please? Okay. I'm not entirely surprised. I must admit, I pressed number one as well. I think you'd be right if you picked any one of the three. I think there's validity in all of them. But it being an HR risk and something that you need to engage with is really the theme that I was hoping you were going to go with, because it's what I've predicated most of my talk around. But we could have rethought it on our feet if not. I do agree there's some opportunities in DB, and you could be right if it's a provider issue, but I still think there's some things that you'll need to do yourself. Let's see, oops, we go this way. Can we go back to my presentation? There we go. Is that me or you doing that? There we go. Done it before. Right. We did some research in 2015 when Freedom and Choice first hit. We went out to UK HR leaders and surveyed them of what they thought employees were going to be expecting, what would be their responsibility. As you can see, the results were 80% thought that employees would expect the employer to support them on freedom and choice. Perhaps slightly more alarmingly, just under half thought employees would hold their employer responsible for the decisions that they made. So I think that really highlights the point that 70% of you were on about this being an HR issue that you need to engage with. So the topic for today, or for me for this 20 minutes, is about what you can expect from the regulators. We've already heard from the first of the two Johns about the tax changes this March. I don't think they're going to be a big issue for freedom and choice. I really don't. The leaks that are coming out are leaning towards capped or flat, but the pensions liberalisation agenda will remain the same. So you can press ahead regardless. Whether you can afford to divert your budget to it or you've got some other challenges, well, that's a business issue for you to wrestle with. But in terms of knowing what you need to know, I think you can move ahead with freedom and choice. So we have two regulators, not one, of course, now in pensions. We have the FCA for contract-based schemes, and we have the pensions regulator for trust-based schemes, including master trust. And they have one simple, clear, consistent message. We expect you to tell your employees about their choices. And there's another one that follows just underneath that, which is we also expect you to tell them about pensions-wise. That agenda hasn't changed. That policy statement, that policy direction was formulated pretty bloody quickly last April when this came out, but it hasn't really altered since then. And although we will see some new documents and some new guidance coming out this year, we don't expect any new policy. There might be different lyrics, but the melody is going to be the same. Tell your employees about their choices. So what does that mean in each of the two contexts? Well, I'll pick the FCA first and think about some of the things that they're looking at for for contract-based schemes. The big shift that we're already seeing from the FCA is a move away from consumer protection and towards consumer empowerment. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that because the world's a hell of a lot more complex than it used to be. If you go back to an annuity choice, it was pretty easy to say, insurer Y would have given me £15 a week, insurer Z would have given me £10 a week, I can see which one's better value. If you're trying to compare drawdown choices, income profiles, investment choices, investment performance, investment charges, that's a really sophisticated analysis that you'll only be able to do with hindsight. So they're having to move that way. And that's the clear direction that's going to come through the providers and through all of us as employers and workers in the industry to tell people about their choices and help them understand. We're already seeing from the FCA some real teeth where organisations have not told consumers about their choices. So we had a few years ago open market options, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. The one that's on the go at the moment is around enhanced annuities. And a small number of insurance companies, too small a number of insurance companies, prominently letting people know that they could pursue an enhanced annuity and might have got a better pension than with a standard annuity. The FCA is looking into that. There'll be some research through this year, and there's already murmuring in the industry of it being the next PPI claim scandal. Tell your employees about their choices is clearly what they want to see, and what we'll see from the FCA to implement that will be clarity, prominence, plain English, all pushed through the providers because, of course, we're on the contract-based side. Now, the main vehicle that we'll see from the FCA is the IGC, the Independent Governance Committees. So these are comparable in some ways to a trustee board, but in a contract scheme and provided by the insurance company that runs that scheme. There's one really important point I'd like you to take away as employers if you have a contract-based scheme and you're looking to the IGC to solve your problems. They have no remit whatsoever to concern themselves with benefit adequacy. They're concerned about lots of other operational things and value for money at certain points in the chain, but it is not their job to get your employees to retirement with enough money saved. That's still your job. Last thing I mentioned from the FCA, some really interesting stats that came out a couple of weeks ago in January about the choices people have been making so far. I'm sure some of you will have seen them. This was from the second quarter in this tax year, and it was around contract-based products and who'd been doing what in freedom and choice. I've got my stats with me in case I need to look down. 180,000 individual actions taken. Whether they're separate people or the same people acting twice, we don't know. It's not that granular. Interestingly, a little bit of a dropping off from the quarter before. 205,000 incidences in the first quarter of the tax year, 180,000 in the second quarter of the tax year. 68% took full cash out. That's a pretty headline-grabbing number, 2/3 of people grabbing the money and running. And on the face of it, pretty alarming. But when you go to the next layer of information down, 9 out of 10 of those were small pots. That's not really that surprising when you think about DC still being fairly young, and for people in the later years of their career, they probably haven't had that much money in DC. So I think that's a phenomena that's likely to work its way through the system, a bit like a snake swallowing a rat, and then we'll see a more normal procedure after that. For the people who didn't take full cash out, the 32%, we saw quite an interesting pattern. 2/3 going to drawdown, and 1/3 still taking annuities. We saw some pretty interesting stats on the regulated advice they were taking. So 58% of people taking drawdown sought regulated financial advice. And it was 37% of annuitants. It's not great, but it's not a disaster either. I think the FCA would think that's something that we can build on. The statistic that's going to give them some concern is PensionWise. On average, across the piece, 17% went to PensionsWise for assistance. And we saw a couple of days ago new stats from the DWP saying the average cost of delivery per transaction for PensionsWise has been £516. You can get regulated individual financial advice cheaper than that. So clearly this drive to tell your employees about their choices and tell them about PensionsWise is going to be more prominent, to get it taken up more and to bring that unit cost down. I'll change over, if I can, to the pensions regulator now and the master trust side of things and the trust-based side of things. There will be a lot of new paperwork this year. There's already a new lighter touch DC code, and there will be new guidance to accompany it coming out this July. It's not really going to change very much. It's going to be the same policy as we've already seen. It's just re-articulated in a marginally more concise way. So you know everything you need to know to be able to take this forward. And their messages are exactly consistent with the FCA. We expect you to tell your employees about their choices. And a little bit louder from TPR, we really need you to tell them about PensionsWise, because unlike the FCA, we haven't got a regulated advice arm that we can have our people falling back on. So the regulator really needs you to push people towards PensionsWise or have regulated financial advice and put them across into the FCA's remit. There was an excellent document that TPR rushed out last April called The Essential Guide for Communicating with Members About Pension Flexibilities. And not a great title, it's not particularly catchy, but it did have some really good content in it. And that's going to form the basis of a lot of the guidance that will come out this July. So don't wait for the draft and don't wait for July. Pick up that document from last April and familiarise yourself with it. There's some really good standard text, and there's some generic risk warnings that you can take and use, and we expect that to come through in much the same form. I'll change tack slightly now and talk about statutory money purchase illustrations, because we're in the trust-based world, and that's the key projection tool that's required by law to be given to members. Sadly, it's an absolute nonsense. It's way out of date. It's based on projecting members to retirement age and buying an annuity based on today's annuity prices. Well, we've already seen that 2/3 of people are taking cash, and of the ones who don't, 2/3 of the rest are taking drawdown. So it really isn't very helpful. Now, there's a lot of lobbying to change this. I would be surprised, I'd be delighted, but I'd be surprised if we see that change in 2016. So what that means is that trustees of master trusts, trust-based schemes, will need to wrap other information around that. And the pensions regulators started making some noises and directions about the sorts of things you can do. So even if it's as simple as a projected pot value, or some ranges of outcomes, or some targeting of income levels, those would be the sorts of things that would give your employees a decent chance to make good choices at retirement. Interestingly, SMPIs don't belong to either the FCA or the pensions regulator. They belong to the FRC. So we're lobbying, others are lobbying. It may take a while before that changes. So I think you have enough of a status quo to crack on with it now rather than waiting for a silver bullet to fix it for you. Before I move off the regulators onto the corporate agenda, I'll just say a few words about DB as well, defined benefits. I think it was 13% of you said you thought there was a chance to shrink liabilities. Perhaps slightly cheeky wording, and of course we do that in a responsible, risk-sensitive way. There was a guidance document from TPR called Guidance on DB to DC Conversion, and it had some really interesting nuggets. It still has the same theme of we expect you to tell your employees about their choices, even though it's DB. And the most common conversation that I've heard amongst trustees has been, do we, don't we, put a transfer value on a retirement statement? And an awful lot of nervousness of, if we put it on there, are we being seen to promote or induce? Now, this TPR guidance is very clear on the subject, surprisingly clear on the subject. And I'll read you out a quote or two from what it says. Communication might include information on certain categories of member, such as those receiving pre-retirement material that includes a transfer value, or where the trustees routinely include transfer values as part of an annual benefit statement. However, trustees should avoid placing particular emphasis on one option or options, and we expect material to be fair, clear, unbiased, straightforward. So TPR is starting from the premise that you're going to tell people about a transfer value, all under that heading of we expect you to tell them about their choices. Now, why is TPR doing that? Its position actually is pretty mature and pretty balanced. I'll give you another quote that I think illustrates that quite well. Individual members may also place a higher premium on accessing their benefits in a different way as compared to the regular income for life provided by a DB scheme. So they know, they say clearly they don't think it will be in most people's interest, but for some it will. And for those that it will, if you haven't told them about it and made them aware that they had that choice, you're the ones who are going to be in trouble. It's going to be the trustees who are asked, why didn't you give them that option? And if you think of it from the member perspective, I stay in a DB scheme, I retire in a DB scheme, I die, my family could have had that whole estate in a very tax advantageous way. Why weren't they informed of these things? You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, so you really do need to tell them about their choices. There's one more bit of absolution as well that I just draw out of this that I think is helpful for you, and that's about the need to take regulated advice. So quoting from the same document, it is not the trustee's role to second-guess the individual member's circumstances and their choice to transfer their safeguarded benefits. It is also not their role to prevent a member from making decisions which the trustee might consider to be inappropriate. So in a Pontius Pilate-like way, you can put this information on your documents, provided it doesn't have any undue weight, and wash your hands of it. You've done what you need to do. You've told the member about their choices. You've pointed them at pensions-wise. As trustees, you have done what the regulator expected you to do. That's a pretty different interpretation to a lot of conversations around trustee tables of, should we put a transfer on, shouldn't we put a transfer value quote on? So a final couple of words on TPR about how it's going to implement. We've had IGCs from the FCA TPR's big agenda is also trusteeship, and its flagship for this is the 21st Century Trustee. It wants to improve standards across the board. If it doesn't see that happening, it's likely to use its powers to replace trustees, to improve the professionalisation of trustees, and probably to lean on some trustee boards to give it up, to say, we can't do this, we don't have the budget, we don't have the skills, we'll fold our scheme into another, probably larger, better run master trust of some sort or some other arrangement. On master trust, TPR's been pretty punchy actually. There's about 70 or so in the market at the moment, and they've said, that's just too many. The market can't support that many providers, and we expect that to be whittled down over time. And actually they put a stake in the ground saying they feel that 10 is about the right number. Now that speaks to a tremendous amount of market disruption on the provider side. For DB, their main vehicle is going to be the annual funding statement. They're going to take the usual comments about link it back into funding, allow for it in your liquidity. The one thing I'd encourage you to look out for if you're interested in the DB side is that the transfer value guidance, calculation of transfer values for DB schemes, is woefully out of date. It was done about 10 years ago, and it really does look like it. It's on the policy team's to-do list. It's not quite at the top, but it's getting there. I think we might see something at the back end of this year, if not, hopefully early next year, that will bring it into a more modern era. And if we're putting more prominence to transfer values, if they're on retirement quotes, if they're on benefit statements, you need to be thinking more deeply about what they stand for and how they fit in the overall risk management and cost management. So, corporate agendas really quickly. Do you have a duty of care as employers? You bet you do. With the benefit of hindsight, you will have seen that you could tell members we're going to make bad choices, and that's why we have this pressure to tell them about their choices. As I've said already, I think you have the things that you need to make those decisions. So the actions that a responsible employer should be taking are engage with it now, raise it up the corporate agenda, put in place the right responsibilities and accountabilities through your team to drive these things through. I'd encourage you all to take a strategic approach. There's an endemic issue in pensions that we have chronic undersaving, and we also have the removal of default retirement ages. If you can't get your employees up to retirement with enough money saved and help them make those choices well, they will hang around in your workforce and you'll have a cascade of issues back across the entire workforce. So you need to engage with it now to avert that problem before it happens. The main thing I think you need to do is be active. Now, I'm not suggesting that the people in the room take up jazzercise or aquarobics like our modern day pensioners might be doing. It's more about being active consumers. So TPR and the FCA are pushing IGCs and pushing trustee boards to innovate, to change their products, to change their services, to change the way they engage with their consumers. It's for the people in this room to change your providers. Review, replace, challenge, push, move around. The market will only be efficient if you enable the money to move towards the good and the innovative and drive out the bad and the lazy. Very easy to say. It's actually not that expensive to review your provider, maybe £15,000 for a pretty straightforward review. The big issue is the disruption to the workforce. So how can you cope with that disruption to the workforce? I would say change the nature of the conversation you have with your employees about retirement. Change it from being it's a conversation for some date, 10, 20, 30 years out, to a more general conversation where we're saying to them, we will help you get a savings plan. We need you to do your bit and figure out what you want to save and what you can save, and we'll lead you halfway up that path, but we will help you get a savings plan, and along that way we will provide you with the right vehicles to make saving in the most tax efficient way we can with whatever way the government wind is blowing at the time. And that will put you in a much more resilient position to be able to change the particular savings plans you have in as the government changes legislation, and to switch your providers in and out so you can chase innovation and see it as a renewing of energy or a refreshing of tools, but keeping a separate conversation and messaging that's consistent with your employees throughout. Final thing, that there is already innovation in the market and there is tons more to come. I think every provider has something either out or on the way. I'll talk very briefly about these four and then we'll take a couple of questions. Guided outcomes is one that my firm offers. It started off as helping people save for retirement with adequate levels to provide the kind of income that they would like. With the freedom and choice agenda, we've been able to flip that as well to help people in the decumulation phase too. The part that's really helpful about it is it can sit on top of a provider platform. And so if you want to change your provider platforms, whether that's the pre-retirement or the post-retirement, you can still have a consistent portal and a consistent engagement with the employee. So you're not as wedded, it's not as disruptive to change. AllianceBernstein, they've long been trailblazers in target date funds. They've put a new bolt-on on top, giving an extended window rather than a single date. They call it Retirement Bridge. Enables people to take income and stay invested. L&G have come out with something called their Retirement Income, multi-asset fund. Again, similar sort of policy, stay invested, still be able to take income, low volatility. There will be lots more of these investment products to come. One of the problems we're seeing is they're largely coming from the retail side at the moment, where drawdowns existed for a long time. So you might have wholesale pricing on the savings part, maybe AMC of 30 basis points, and retail pricing on the in-retirement part, maybe AMCs of a whole %. That's got to change. We need to see that innovation, and we need to stop it being clunky where you sell everything at retirement and then you buy it all back again the day after retirement in this new product. A last thing again that sits on top is a couple of products from LV one's called Pension Compass, and that's for DB members making choices. One's called Retirement Wizard, same sort of product but for DC members. And again, it can sit on top of any platform, provides online tools, regulated advice, and a drawdown platform and annuity broking service for members who want to go all the way through. So, that's a quick canter through freedom and choice, and the three things, just to pull out, you know what you need to know from the regulators. There might be some new bits of paper, but it's not going to change, so you can crack on with it and you don't need to be nervous. Tell your employees about their choices. If you only remember one thing today, I really hope it's that. And be active consumers. We need to change this market, and it's us who need to be bold. Thank you.
Have we got a question from the audience at all? Did Patrick blow you all away with the jargon? Stand silent.
Or if you're just woken up, now the lights have come up.
Yes, we've got a question right down the front here. We've got the mics just coming.
Hi there.
Hi.
Since everyone else got put on the spot, you didn't put anything on your slides about salary sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So just curious your thoughts on pension salary sacrifice. Will it, won't it be around in the future?
It's up for grabs. I think it will depend on what happens on the 16th of March. George Osborne wanted TEE. It would have generated a tremendous amount of brought forward tax revenue. I don't think he's going to be able to do it because it's just too hard to make it work in public sector pensions. So he's having to settle for capped and flat. When he's figured out how much money he's managed to make out of that, we'll see whether he still needs to be greedy and push on into salary sacrifice. With the way that policy has been being developed at a government level, I don't think they will have any regard at all for impact on business and impact on industry. I think they will entirely chase tax receipts, and we will just have to pick up the pieces and make do. Because it's not part of the consultation coming through this March, I think we'll get a bit more lead time. Treasury's finding it hard to make sense of EET, TEE. So there'll probably be further work coming out Q2, Q3 this year once we're the other side. Sorry, that doesn't say anything more definite.
And we'll pick that up in the panel just before lunchtime as well. We've got different opinions on the panel. Patrick, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.